Hello folks, J. Scott Phillips here, and today we are bound for Rocket Summers. That's right, Rocket Summers plural, because I'm going to be talking about 3 different Rocket Summers in this video. One by Michael K. Vaughan, and the other 2 by Ray Bradbury. Now, the first one is, of course, this brand new BookTube event that Mike created just this year for the entire month of July, where he's encouraging all of us to be reading vintage science fiction. And by vintage science fiction, he's defining that for the purposes of the BookTube event as any science fiction published before 1970. And he's also suggesting that we might think about kind of slicing July up into 4 equal parts to kind of give us a broader range of reading vintage science fiction across a wider number of years. And so the first part would be reading any science fiction that might be defined as science fiction, going as far back as you want to go in time, and then anything published all the way up through the 1930s. Then the second part would be science fiction published in the 1940s. The third part, science fiction from the 50s, and finally the last part from the 1960s. And I will leave a link to his announcement video for Rocket Summer in the notes down below, in which he explains why he's using 1970 as a cutoff year for vintage science fiction. He's also got a number of co-hosts. I'll leave links to all of their channels down below. And then the second Rocket Summer that I'm going to be talking about today, the short story by Ray Bradbury that is the opening page. It's just a 1-page long story. The opening page to his 1950 book, The Martian Chronicles. And then the third Rocket Summer that I'll be talking about is his original story, Rocket Summer, that was first published in the spring 1947 issue of Planet Stories, also called Rocket Summer, but really has nothing at all to do with The Martian Chronicles. Separate story, and we'll talk about that, but it is not nearly as well known as the Rocket Summer that appears in the pages of The Martian Chronicles, and we'll get into that. Now, I have always been a vintage science fiction fan. And since I've been doing my channel here, I've enjoyed doing videos about vintage science fiction. And I have yet to do one on Ray Bradbury. So Rocket Summer gives me a great excuse to finally do one. And Bradbury was one of my probably earliest science fiction favorite authors from when I started reading science fiction back in junior high and high school. And I remember one year for Christmas, I think, I got a box set from Bantam of 6 or 7 mass market paperbacks, all by Ray Bradbury. And when I got that book, that was at Christmas time, if I remember right, that entire semester afterwards, I just plowed through all those books, reading one after another, mostly during my study hall classes. And but I got through all of them, and then started reading. I think I read a couple of more books that weren't in that collection, and it was just that semester was just all Ray Bradbury all the time. So been a big fan of Ray Bradbury going way back to those days. Now, this is my offering for Rocket Summer for the 1940s. I've already done a 1930s video, and I'll leave a link to that below if you're interested. But before I get into the 1947 Rocket Summer, I'm going to start off by going ahead to the 1950s version, just because it's the much better known Rocket Summer. It's the one everyone thinks about. It's the one that Michael K. Vaughan named the BookTube event after. And so have to jump ahead to 1950 when The Martian Chronicles was first published. But just the year before that, 1949, Doubleday invited Bradbury to come to New York. They thought they could really put him on the map. He'd already been publishing stories for almost a decade at that point. Mostly, well, even before that, in fanzines. And then he started getting stories published professionally in the pulps, but he was trying to make that crossover to the slicks because he thought that was a much broader audience and would pay better. And by 1950, by the time The Martian Chronicles had come out, he already had a collection of his previously published short stories printed under the title of Dark Carnival. He still wasn't all that well known yet, and Doubleday thought that if he came to New York City, they could really help him get going. And that book that they were going to publish for him was The Martian Chronicles, and it was intended to be a fix-up novel, which you've probably heard the term before if you're a science fiction fan, but those were just becoming really popular in the beginning of the 50s. And those are books that are, for the most part, collections of an author's previously published short stories that were individual standalone stories that now the author is putting together as a collection of stories, often with interstitial new material added to weave all these separate stories into a more cohesive narrative and kind of make it more of a novel. And that was the intention for The Martian Chronicles. However, and it's often described as a fix-up novel, but there are 24, 25 short stories in The Martian Chronicles, but only, I think, 8 of them or so were actually printed before in other publications. And so Bradbury wrote another 13 or so original stories to flesh The Martian Chronicles out to book length. And Rocket Summer was one of those. And as I mentioned before, it's so short, less than a page long, that rather than talking about the story itself, I thought I might just read it. And as such, now I've mentioned this in other videos too, I'm not a professional narrator by any means, so I'm going to ask your help while I'm reading it to imagine that you're hearing the voice of Rod Serling and see if that gets me over the hump here. Then we'll talk about it quickly for a second and move on to the other story. But while I'm reading it, just so you don't have to watch me reading with my nose buried in a book here, I'm going to put up the illustration by Dean Ellis that he illustrated for the Bantam edition of Martian Chronicles. All right, so here we go. January 1999, Rocket Summer. 1 minute it was Ohio winter, with doors closed, windows locked, the panes blind with frost, icicles fringing every roof, children skiing on slopes, housewives lumbering like great black bears in their furs along the icy streets. And then a long wave of warmth crossed the small town. A flooding sea of hot air. It seemed as if someone had left a bakery door open. The heat pulsed among the cottages and bushes and children. The icicles dropped, shattering to melt. The doors flew open. The windows flew open. The children worked off their wool clothes. The housewives shed their bare disguises. The snow dissolved and showed last summer's ancient green lawns. Rocket Summer. The words passed among the people in the open, airing houses. Rocket Summer. The warm desert air changing the frost patterns on the windows, erasing the artwork. The skis and sleds suddenly useless. The snow falling from the cold sky upon the town, turning to a hot rain before it touched the ground. Rocket Summer. People leaned from their dripping porches and watched the reddening sky. The rocket lay on the launching field, blowing out pink clouds of fire and oven heat. The rocket stood in the cold winter morning, making summer with every breath of its mighty exhausts. The rocket made climates, and summer lay for a brief moment upon the land. And that's it. So it's not really a story. It's more of just a mood piece, a moment that conjures up the atmosphere that then is now going to launch you into the rest of the Martian Chronicles. And it's typical Bradbury, I think, where he just romanticizes about space travel. And it just changes the entire environment of this little Ohio town in the winter that really kind of describes the power of the rocket and the potential and the romance of space travel and what is to come in the rest of the book. A very positive, optimistic outlook of space travel and adventures to come. So that's how the Martian Chronicles starts off. But now let's move back to the 1947 rocket summer and focus a little bit more on that. And to start off with, let's just kind of get a running start with a little bit about Ray Bradbury and what he was up to at the time that he was writing Rocket Summer in 1947. Bradbury was born in 1920 in Waukegan, Illinois, and then the family moved to Tucson, Arizona during his junior high school years. And then when he was 14, they moved again to Los Angeles. And now to jump ahead to 1946, about the time he was writing Rocket Summer, was a special time for Bradbury. He was having a great time. He was hopelessly and passionately in love with the only girl he had ever dated and was engaged to marry her. Her name was Marguerite McClure. And he was also at that time revising stories, short stories that had been published previously for his collection of stories, Dark Carnival, that was going to be published by Arkham House in April of 47. And at this time, he was also beginning to get short stories published in the Slicks. Rocket Summer, though, was still destined to be published in a pulp magazine of the day, the spring 1947 issue of Planet Stories. Now, the term Rocket Summer, again, doesn't refer to a time of the year, but like in Martian Chronicles, it refers to that pseudo-summer that is created in the surrounding area by the extreme heat issuing from the rocket on the launching pad. So it's mentioned just in one very short paragraph in this version of the story. So I'm going to read it again. And this time while I'm reading it, I'm going to put up a piece of artwork by Les Edwards that was originally commissioned by Hill and Wang for their 2011 adaptation of the Martian Chronicles. It never got used in the publication for some reason. I don't know the story behind that. But it's still a cool illustration, so I'll just put it up while I'm reading this one paragraph here. And then again, I will ask your help in imagining the voice, this time of Garrison Keillor, who may have a little bit more of that Midwest influence here. So here we go. The moon rocket is returning. It will land this morning at 9 o'clock. Everybody's audio was blatting. Like a yellow seed, the rocket dropped down from the sky to sprout roots of flame on which to cushion itself. It fried the tarmac, and a vast deluge of warm air rushed across the country for miles. People sweltered amidst a sudden rocket summer. So you can already tell that this rocket summer has nothing to do with colonizing Mars. It is, in fact, about the first man flight to the moon. And the rocket has been developed by a company, not a government agency like NASA or anything, but by a corporation that has for its president William Stanley. And he has been in charge of developing this new technology in this rocket. The entire world is all excited about this. It's being promoted, commercialized, merchandised, and the people can't wait. This is just the greatest thing, and the whole country, if not the entire world, is just so anxious for this new era of space travel to finally happen, and the public is not to be denied. However, Stanley now, this is the story starts off the day before the launch, and Stanley is having second thoughts, and he's thinking of pulling the plug on the mission because he feels that this is only really safe to do if it is properly regulated and legislated. And he thought that all that would take place during the development of the rocket, but it has not happened. And in fact, the day before the launch, the government has kind of canceled all of that legislation that was in the works. And so now he's worried because he has this philosophy that all the big technologies that have come in the past, all the way back to the crossbow and gunpowder and atomic power, all these things that have come before that weren't kind of predicted about or looked ahead at time, that have resulted in the deaths of millions over the years. And Here we now have a new technology coming that should be regulated from the beginning so that we can avoid all those deaths that would come from rocket travel or space travel in the future. So he wants to pull the plug. However, the public won't have it, and he is kind of descended upon by his own workers who have been building this rocket, and the public in general are demanding that this go through. And so they are actually threatening violence to him and his family. A lot of this sounds kind of familiar these days. But at the last minute, after all these threats and things, and he's started kind of coming up with a plan maybe of what can happen, let's go ahead with the flight after all. So he waves his hand to signify to the ship and to everyone who's kind of surrounding him that, yes, okay, we will go ahead with the launch. And so that is the setup of the story. And now I won't give any of the ending away in case you want to read it. And by the way, if you do want to read it, this is kind of surprising to me, and I may not be right about this, but I do not believe that this version of Rocket Summer has ever been collected in any anthology or collection. But it is available in PDF form online. So if you are interested, I will leave a link down in the notes below so you can read the whole story if you want to. But at this point, as far as talking about the story, I'll leave it at that. And then we will take a look at 2 illustrations for Rocket Summer from the spring 1947 issue of Planet Stories, and we'll talk a little bit about that. This is from the opening spread of the story, and it was illustrated by George Doolin. And as the title page here, we're seeing the moon rocket that is taking off from a futuristic city with Bradbury's towering spires, and he described the sky being populated by gleaming scarlet tumblebugs and yellow plastic beetle pods, the ways that people could get around. So at least in Bradbury's future, by the time we got our first flight to the moon, we did have our flying cars. And as I mentioned before, this takes place somewhere in the mists of New Jersey. And Doolin is giving us a rocket that's launching from a tube, which is not the way it's described in the story itself. It's really more of an upright rocket like you're used to seeing from old science fiction stories and movies from the 50s and 60s. But it still has that classic retro rocket ship look to it, and is fun nonetheless, I think. Now, we'll move ahead to the second and last illustration from the story by another artist, Herman Vestal. Now, he's giving us a turning point scene in the story here just after the moon rocket has returned to New Jersey, and it's been gone for a couple of weeks on its flight to the moon and back. And in Bradbury's story, there is no communication between Earth and the ship, so no one has seen or heard anything from the crew during that time. Now, it is just landing on the pad back in New Jersey, and there is a rabid crowd just swarming around the ship, waiting for their first glimpse of the returning crew. And they are not prepared for what they're about to see. The door opens up, and they can only see rancid, deteriorating forms of the returning crew just falling apart and collapsing on out of the ship. Now, there's absolutely no indication in this story that if there had been some kind of an earthbound legislation or regulation enforced, like Stanley had wanted in the first place, that anything like this could have even been avoided. But Bradbury does give us an unexpected resolution to the story, and I won't say anything more. So if you're interested in it, you're just going to have to read it for yourself, and you'll see what I mean. Now, if you are interested and you don't have access to the story anywhere else, and like I say, I don't believe it's ever been reprinted or collected anywhere, there is that link down in the notes. So check it out if you're a Bradbury fan. And there you have it, folks. So let me know, are you a Bradbury fan? Have you, by any chance, read the original Rocket Summer from Planet Stories 1947? Let me know. Have you got another favorite Bradbury story or book? Let's chat about it. And in the meantime, I'd like to thank Michael K. Vaughan for creating Rocket Summer. It's been a lot of fun reading and rereading science fiction, vintage science fiction from back in the day. I've always been a big fan. And then also thanks to his co-hosts and for any of their videos that they're participating in. And I will let you now all get back to reading whatever you're reading this July. And until we have a chance to explore outer space together once again, thanks a lot.